Hello, beautiful people. My name's Kristen. Thank you for stopping by my channel to see my book reviews. These are the books that I read during the month of April, and I always try to read a classic, a nonfiction, a new release, and then whatever else. And I maybe didn't get quite to as many books as I normally do, but the ones I did were all good. I have no 1 stars to report. So as always, I will hold up each one. You can scroll along where you are interested in. If I hold up my hand, that means 5 stars. My first was reading the last in the trilogy. I had read the first 2 for March for St. Patrick's Day. The last one in the Irish Born series is called Born in Shame. And there was a legend that came out and was kind of wrapped up with the whole family history in the trilogy. So I really, really appreciate that about Nora Roberts. I'm not a huge romance reader, but I really like how she always takes a kind of a little quirky element, and I'm particularly fond of Ireland. It's at the very top of my bucket list of where I want to go. So most of her settings are in Ireland or have some ties to Ireland. So I like to stick with Nora Roberts. So the Irish Born trilogy, really, really fun. Couple sisters, and then a mystery sister comes in for the 3rd one. So romance, very typical, very lighthearted, but some funsy elements. That's really as much as I could sum up that. Then another fun, lighter read. I read Rise and Shine, Benedict Stone by Phaedrick Patrick. Yes. And I think this might even be her first novel. I had read The Curious Charms of Mr. Pepper, and I loved it. That was like a 5-star book. I really, really, really like her. Now, the disclaimer is that you have to kind of go with things being a little too convenient or falling in places sometimes. When you need to know a piece of information and that character just happens to be right there kind of thing, that kind of easy flow. But if you can suspend that, she's very creative. The Charms one was all about charms on a charm bracelet. This one, the last name is Stone, but there's also gemstones, and they're gem collectors and jewelers, and each chapter is a different gemstone with the meaning of the gemstone. And the premise is Mr. Stone has lost his wife and kind of lost his way and path in life. And his niece, who he wasn't expecting to show up, just shows up. And there's like having difficulty trying to reconnect to his brother and try to find out what's going on with her. And she's not totally forthcoming, but she really helps pull him out of his shell and kind of re-energize his zest for life, if you will. And it's sweet and it's cute, and I love the way she writes her characters, and they're just adorable, and I find myself kind of laughing along, and there's usually some poignant life meaning kind of things. So I can totally appreciate this for that kind of book. So when you're looking particularly for something a little bit lighter or feel goodsy kind of easier read, I really recommend any of her books. So that's that one. Then my classics. So this is another Wilke Collins, Hide and Seek. This is his very first mystery that he ever wrote. He wrote this before The Moonstone. He wrote this before Woman in White. And I think this is, if I remember right, this is only the 3rd book he wrote total in his history, and he's written a lot. So this is the mystery is around Mary, who they also call Madonna, and she is deaf and mute, and we're trying to figure out kind of who she is and how she got to be how she was. And there's a circus, and there's like high society, and there's like trying to be proper and bring her up and all these kinds of things. And so anyway, the hiding is introducing the characters, and the seeking is seeking the mystery behind how all this came to pass. And Wilke Collins is a fantastic author that I adore his writing style. And so this is definitely a 5-star. This is a 5-star classic for me. Wilke Collins, one of my favorite classic authors. Then I also read Cranford. This is Elizabeth Gaskill. She is the same author who wrote North and South, is probably her most famous one. But this one, as I was reading it, I was chuckling to myself. I was just like so appreciated. It is a pretty slow read. It's very character heavy. So if you are the kind of person who really likes to get attached to a character more than a plot, it's very classic style, high society, where we are very concerned about having the proper etiquette about things. It is funny because this kind of breaks some norms, and that's kind of one thing Elizabeth Gaskill, I think, is known for. So Cranford is a community that is predominantly women. The men just keep on having mysterious fates that happen to them, which is kind of funny, except for, it's serious that things are happening to them. But, it's, and the thing is the women aren't just sitting around. A lot of classics go around the theme of we have to marry the women off because they don't have the direct possessions and power that the men had in the times and places of the settings of these books. But this kind of goes against that a little bit. The women are even entrepreneurial and supporting one another. And like when one of them gets into a sticky situation, the other ones all kind of come around and say, well, how are we going to help out or get this person back established? And so very sufficient women, which I think is noteworthy and fun. And like each little chapter, because it's one of those that was kind of originally written in a series of short stories kind of put together in a novel, you have a bunch of little standalone cute stories about the postal delivery or about the dog, or there was one about the cat. And so those kind of little things, they're not high adventure and plot, but they're just kind of life and funny. And I really, really enjoyed this. I totally give this one a 5-star classic, but I recommend it to people who want the slower, more character, are willing to envelop in the classic style of writing, but maybe it's a little interesting because it pushes those norms from what you typically read about women and have some cute little subplots, I guess. Next, for nonfiction, I did read a couple nonfiction this month. This is Chance by John Moolens, however you say his name. This is a documentary on the big earthquake. I think it was 9.6 on the Richter scale in Anchorage, Alaska, just outside of Anchorage, Alaska in 1964. I lived in Alaska from 1983 until 86. And and so I was in Anchorage, and so a lot of what they're talking about I kind of knew, although a lot of what was there had fallen down and had to be rebuilt. So it was just a fascinating documentary. And what was also really interesting about it that you might be interested in is if you have any interest in like news or broadcasting or any of those kind of things, the kind of story within a story, if you will, is around a woman named Jeannie, who was the only real female broadcaster. Mostly they wanted the news anchors because it was mostly radio, it was mostly the audio, and so they wanted male voices, but she was like a sparky woman who just held her own, and she became really, really recognized and really the voice of the Alaskan earthquake during that time, broadcast not only all over the country, but even globally. So just a fascinating book on Anchorage, on earthquakes, on newscasting, particularly back in the 60s. Then my other nonfiction book that I read was Crow's Feet, Life as We Age, edited by Nancy Peckenham. This is a collection of essays, so it's multiple, I think up to 20 different authors, and they're short. They're just some of them are only maybe 2 pages long, and some of them maybe as long as 6 or 7 pages, and that's it. And it's just their perspectives or even a short poem about how they feel about aging. So I think I took a few little notes and underlines and highlights in it, and I think what I would like to do is kind of reflect on my aging process so far in life and maybe do a singled out book review on this separately. So there's that. Then for my new release, I read People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. And this is another 5-star book, y'all. This is amazing. I loved this book so much. I was really surprised. I was not expecting, I'm not a huge romance person. And this is a friends to romance. Now, again, you have to stop and suspend your disbelief because basically it goes from the here and now, the premise of they're friends, they've been platonic from the beginning, and they started a tradition to go on vacation with one another because they weren't connected in college to anybody else and they both wanted to go away, so they both went away as friends. I'm down with that. I get that. That's cool. Then they said, we're going to keep on doing this as a summer trip. 1 week every summer we're going to travel. Cool. I'm down with that. But it goes from, the chapters of present day and something, crisis is going on and we're trying to figure out what it is and what the backstory is. And then it goes 10 years ago. And then it comes back to the present, and then it goes 9 years ago. Then it comes back to the present 8 years ago. So on and so forth until you're back to the present and you now know the entire history. But 10 years? Are you trying to tell me that in 10 years, it takes you 10 years to work out a relationship? That's a bit much for me. Okay, that's a bit much for me. But I loved it. I can go ahead and set that aside and just say, okay, I'm just going to set that aside and go with it. And now it's really funny. The dialogue is just really entertaining. They get to travel, so you get to learn and see new places. It's fun. I love it. Totally 5-star romance. If you want a place to start, I'm going to recommend this, and I'm totally going to go out and get more books by this author. So, hold. And finally, a fairly new release, Winter Counts, by David Heska Wanbli Weiden. I have to read his name because it's cool. But this is a fantastic story about basically a vigilante on the Rosebud Indian Reservation. There is not a good enforcement for law and order, and the federal government only steps in at the very highest drugs and murders, and the local authority just kind of brushes off most everything. And so this is the story of Vigil Wounded Knee, who just takes matters into his own hands, but then gets roped into trying to help the community with a drug issue and a lot of corruption that is going on, and it becomes a fascinating kind of thriller suspense. You learn about some Indian situations and traditions and all these kind of good things, and I just loved it. I did my own separate book review for this one. I will link a card up here if you'd like to hear more about this story. This is probably my favorite one that I read this month out of all of them. Total 5 stars. This book, totally recommended. Anybody, maybe not if you're totally squeamish and you don't like thrillers and suspense. Maybe that would be a nod against. But if you're interested at all in Native Americans or in suspense, thrillers, dramas, all that kind of stuff, I highly recommend this one. So there you have it, my books that I read in the month of April. I hope that you will leave me a comment below if you've read any of these, if you now want to read any of these, if you're reading something really fantastic, particularly you think it might go along in the same lines of any of the ones I've read, leave me a comment, let me know about it. My list continues to grow long of books that I want to read, but that's what makes it interesting, right? Happy reading, y'all. Take care.